Hi, this is another Ask Augustin. Today I'm going to talk more about looking very closely at the score and what are some of the things you might want to look for when you open a score. So this is my score of the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. A lot of the things that I might mention and touch on are things that people do talk about in music theory class, and sometimes violinists, they kind of think, well, theory, it doesn't, who needs it? It doesn't matter, but it's actually so important. The more analysis you do, the more you reflect on the form and what happens harmonically in a piece, the more information you have, the more things you really know for certain. It is almost like a structure of facts that you have about the piece, of things that you know, and within that you can then let yourself be guided by inspiration and instinct. Okay, so there's of course the big structure, the big form of the movement. It can be useful just to look at how is this piece differently maybe from the way composers usually write concertos. We could talk now a lot about how the Mendelssohn concerto has a totally different form from concertos before it, because the violin starts right away and all of that. It's very important to think about these things. It gives you a perspective on also how significant the piece was at the time it was written, and you should always know, whatever part of the piece you play, what part of the form you're in and what its function and importance is in the overall structure of the movement. But what's also really important are the small structures out of which this music is written. Already in the first theme, this is constructed out of these smaller pieces. It has an upbeat, and then it's 1 bar plus 1 bar and 2 bars. And showing very slightly these little breaths in the theme is actually really important. It's almost like a tradition among violinists to actually play it all completely legato, but that is not the articulation that Mendelssohn wrote, and it's not quite actually how the theme was conceived by the composer. So thinking about those things, where, like, from which note does the phrase start? It's often sometimes it's from the offbeat, sometimes it's from the downbeat. You need to think about that. Where are these little breaths in the theme so that it has a certain structure? You don't want to exaggerate how much you show it. It's not that you're trying to teach the structure to the audience, but it should always, the knowledge of it should be in there, and once you really understand it once, then you will, without even having to think about it, you will start showing it. It'll become natural to breathe in those places, to structure it like this. Sometimes looking at the score will actually tell you whether the composer was thinking that the violinist would be free, or whether the composer was intending the violin line to be pretty straight in time, based on what they write, what other things they write. So if doing this thing, that was terrible. Doing that thing, the orchestra is playing the main material and moving notes everywhere, and of course you have to be totally straight. But then later on, when you go, you can take time. Everyone stops playing. These kinds of moments when the whole orchestra stops and then starts again after you play something, those will be moments that it kind of signals you that Mendelssohn did that on purpose, of course, to give the violinist some freedom. Then it's a question of how much time do you take and all of that, but you do have that freedom. Another reason why it's so important to look at the score and at the orchestration is because it will tell you a lot about what the balance with orchestra will be like, and how much you need to project your sound, how soft you can play, how loud you can play. Because it's wrong to think that in a concerto you need to play loud all the time. I mean, then you do need to have a wide range of dynamics, and you can have a wide range of dynamics. Composers will plan in moments when you can be quite soft. If there's only strings playing, some held notes, and they're marked piano or even pianissimo, then it will not be a problem to play quite soft, actually. But if winds are playing at the same time, especially if brasses are playing at the same time, the dynamic ranges of those instruments are different, and you will need to adjust. You will need to somehow make the same kind of expression, but at a higher dynamic level. And looking at who is playing, how many people are playing where, that's something that you will not get this information from a piano reduction or from playing with the pianist. You will only get that from looking at the score and then just making mental notes, making notes in your part. This is a moment you can really play soft, and this is a moment, even though it's marked piano or pianissimo in the violin part, the horns are playing with you, or there's like tons of winds playing with you, things like this, then you know this cannot be too soft if you want it to be heard. And this is something, this is a very essential part of studying. Listening to orchestral recordings, to a recording of someone playing this with orchestra, does not really give you this information, because orchestral recordings are generally mixed in such a way that the balances are, you know, more perfect than they might be in the concert hall even. So you don't sometimes get a sense of just how much higher your volume has to be than what you might normally do if you were playing by yourself and saw pianissimo. That it's really a pianissimo that's really quite a bit louder. But you don't want to fall into the trap of just thinking that you have to play the whole thing loud, because then you will not have a very expressive and big dynamic range. I'm also going to briefly talk about harmonic analysis. Now, this is something that I already mentioned a little bit in my video about suspensions. When you look at this place, I'm sorry I'm playing this whole thing on the piano, but it's the only way to really kind of show what's happening harmonically. So, if you only looked at the violin line, you might actually think that it was like this. Maybe, but it's actually, this is a suspension. Think about that dissonance. We feel it, we always feel it here. So you don't want to play it as though you're actually still in this D minor harmony. You need to feel that it wants to go to this note, despite there being a crescendo. So, and now the crescendo starts. You want to be aware of this. Crescendo does not always mean, okay, from here you get louder until here. You know, as a precise, you know, you need to ask, why is there crescendo here? What is happening there? And what's happening is that the harmony is taking a turn towards more tension and so we are here and it starts to relax. And we're back in C major. Now it's always a little bit harder to read the wind parts because of the transpositions, and it takes a little bit of getting used to, and sometimes it's like, what note is that? It gets easier with time. You want to be aware harmonically not only of what harmony you're in, but also the inversion of the chord. Which inversion is it? Whenever you have the 6/4 inversion, which is this one that has a dominant at the bottom, in all classical and early romantic music, that's the signal there's a cadence coming. Whenever you land on a note that is on top of such a 6/4, that is on the 6/4 inversion, it often has like a little bit of extra weight and awareness that there's about a cadence happening, kind of like preparing that. This is endless. The more you look at score and the more you do score study, the more details you will find, the more things that are worth thinking about, and there's actually always more to discover, even in pieces that you know very, very well. I've learned very, very much from conductors that I've worked with, because of course score study, that's what they do all the time, and it's well worth it, and it'll tell you a lot about how to play the violin line. I hope that's helpful, and let's see you next time.